Going through all of these steps, from sunlight to the usable form in the body, this is how the magic happens. But nobody's talking about how can we help to reduce the inflammation that we're experiencing with these chronic diseases. There is a specific microbiome cascade, a microbiome makeup that is correlated with obesity, insulin resistance, and excessive body fat gain. Vitamin D is a group of fat-soluble steroid hormones. All right, so it's not even a vitamin in the conventional sense. It functions as a steroid and does many other processes in the body related to hormones that we're going to talk about soon. But first and foremost, it's a group of fat-soluble steroid hormones. Now, vitamin D is primarily produced in the skin in response to UVB radiation from sunlight. And of course, we know that it can be absorbed through the food that we eat, which we're getting about on average 10% of our vitamin D is coming from food, and upwards of 90% is going to be coming from interacting with sunlight. That's kind of the natural turn of things and evolution of things. If we're talking about humans living in a natural setting, that would be about the ratio. Now, the question is, how does your body turn sunlight into usable vitamin D? Well, the first thing is this incredible interaction that takes place from UVB rays from the sun hitting our skin and interacting with a compound in our skin called 7-dihydrocholesterol. That's right, it's a form of cholesterol embedded in our epidermis that UVB rays from the sun interacts with, and it converts it into something called cholecalciferol, also known as vitamin D3. Now hold up, this isn't where the story ends, because D3 is not the usable form of vitamin D. All right, this is just where the story begins. All right, there's another series of steps involved in getting it into its usable form. But again, it's kicked off when the sun rays hit that cholesterol in your skin. It hits that and it converts it into D3. But from there, it's going to move through the bloodstream to your amazing liver, where your liver is now going to convert that D3 into another compound. And this compound is called 25-hydroxy-vitamin D. All right, 25-hydroxy-vitamin D, also known as 25-hydroxycholecalciferol. All right, long terms, bottom line is now we're getting closer to the usable form of vitamin D. And actually, this is what most doctors will test for if we're looking for vitamin D deficiencies, is this interaction with vitamin D and then this conversion taking place with the liver. But still, this is not the usable form of vitamin D in the body. It has to take another step. And once 25-hydroxy-vitamin D reaches the kidneys, it's getting converted into its final form, which is 125-dihydroxycholecalciferol, aka 125-dihydroxy-vitamin D. And this final compound, in the name that we need to know it by, is calcitriol. All right, this is the real vitamin D. Will the real Slim Shady vitamin D please stand up? He probably needs some vitamin D. All right, calcitriol. This is the final form. This is its ultimate form. All right, so going through all of these steps, from sunlight to the usable form in the body, this is how the magic happens. So you truly cannot get the D without the kidneys being involved. Right? The kidneys are incredibly important in this process. And this is why vitamin D and its synthesis and being able to be usable by the body, it's not just taking a supplement. It's having healthy organ function overall, because we can take all the supplements in the world, have all the vitamin D rich foods in the world. We have to be able to enable our internal organs to make this conversion process happen and give us the benefits that we're going to be talking about. So the kidneys are incredibly underrated in this equation. The kidneys are underrated like Tim Duncan. All right. Tim Duncan, he didn't talk a lot, but he's dunking on people. He's got the smooth moves, keeping his mouth a little closed. So he's underrated because he's not flamboyant. Like he's wearing his Hawaiian shirt and, you know, his flip-flops to the pregame. All right. Underrated, but perennial all-star. All right. Hall of Famer. Shout out to the kidneys. Also, kidneys are underrated like Big Sean, the rapper Big Sean, not me. I'm talking about Big Sean, the rapper. Bars. All right, bars. Have you listened to the new album, Detroit 2? Bars. All right, he's talking about meditation. He's talking about, conventional medicine. He had a story like when he was 19, he had a heart condition. I believe he was 19, but he was a teenager. He had a heart condition. Went to conventional medicine. They said they're going to have to put a pacemaker in it. Went to the holistic doctor. His mother took him to a holistic doctor. They prescribed him magnesium for 3 weeks. Went back to the regular doctor and they said, damn, we don't even need to proceed. That's how I knew that Western medicine was weak. Bars. Big Sean. Underrated. The kidneys, AKA Big Sean. The kidneys are underrated like finding the movie that you were hunting for at Blockbuster Video. All right. That was a vibe. Now we got infinite everything access. Many people will grow up without knowing the thrill of the hunt. A new release comes out and you go to Blockbuster and you actually find it. You get the new release copy. You stand by the door. It's an underrated vibe. It's an underrated feeling. But the kidneys are very much like that, underrated in this incredible process of vitamin D synthesis, conversion, and putting into its usable form. And now we're going to talk about some of the borderline miraculous ways that vitamin D interacts with our bodies. The kidneys are so important in converting vitamin D into its usable forms that a study published in the Clinical Journal of the American Society of Nephrology demonstrated that kidney disease and insufficient kidney function is a major risk factor for vitamin D deficiency. So again, we've got to get our major organs healthy and robust. One of the most essential things for healthy kidney function is simply hydration, making sure we're getting adequate amounts of water and also not forcing our kidneys and our liver to deal with a lot of abnormal foodstuffs. But here's one of the things that vitamin D is most notable for in the body once we get into its usable form. Vitamin D is actually required to absorb calcium from the gut, from food, into the bloodstream. Having too little vitamin D in the body results in the failure to control calcium homeostasis, directly causing osteoporosis and conditions like rickets. All right, rickets used to be hot on the streets. People just walking around like they got the tumbleweed legs. The tumbleweed can just blow right under their legs. They got the ricket. They got the bowed legs. But we've largely eradicated rickets, but still, it still exists. There are still, tens of thousands of cases, maybe hundreds of thousands of cases, but we've got billions of people on the planet, so it's a smaller percentage. But vitamin D is one of the biggest underlying factors with conditions like rickets. So please understand, if we're talking about bone density, vitamin D is critical in that equation. I was marketed to, I know that you were as well. Milk, it does the body good for strong bones. Calcium can't do anything without vitamin D. Vitamin D is the major key alert for calcium to be able to do what it does in the human body. And it's also, calcium isn't just for our bone density, it's also for clotting our blood, and the list goes on and on. So to be able to assimilate calcium, vitamin D is critical. And so growing up, little did I know, again, if you know my story, I was at track practice, aspiring athlete, 4.5 40-yard dash when I was 15 years old, touchdowns, 2 to 3 touchdowns a game. It was crazy. It's doing great. At track practice, doing a 200-meter time trial, I broke my hip while I was running. Just from running, there was no trauma. I didn't fall. My hip broke. My iliac crest broke while I was running. I was drinking milk daily, but it wasn't doing the trick. Clearly, because I broke my hip. But nobody stopped to ask, how did a kid break his hip from running? My bone density was that low. Plenty of calcium, definitely lacking vitamin D because of my lifestyle. Literally, I was on this program where I'm getting bused to the quote good schools. It's dark outside. Like I'm literally going to school, getting to the bus stop, getting on the bus at like 5 a.m. in the morning. And I don't leave there oftentimes, especially Missouri, where I grew up. Getting out of school, like I've got a tiny bit of daylight left a lot of the year. So that's one part of it. And also, but that's not the only part. We're going to talk about some of that stuff as well, getting access to adequate sunlight. And also the time of year plays a role. but it's the health of the internal organs, right? So the liver being able to convert and do its job, and also the kidneys being able to convert and do their job. And definitely, I had some liver problems for sure with the way that I was eating. Now, yes, vitamin D is an incredibly important nutrient for our bones and our bone density and our bone development. But that's not the only bone it's good for. Vitamin D, as we talked about at the top of the episode, it's a steroid hormone. It's a steroid hormone. And a study published in the International Journal of Impotence Research found that compared with healthy men, subjects with vitamin D deficiency obtained lower scores for erectile function, orgasmic function, and sexual desire. Without the D, we have a little bit more problem given the D. All right. So this is an important part of this conversation that's looked over. It's a steroid hormone. So it's involved in bone formation. It's involved, with bone density. Our steroid hormones have a lot to do with that, but also sexual function. That's another big role that vitamin D plays. And deficiency in vitamin D, it's one of those things where you got, you might have the bow leg version versus, never mind. So I want you to keep that in mind as well. It plays a lot of different roles, but it can be kind of subjugated in our culture today to being this one thing. Right now, what's top of mind is the immune system connection. And what we're going to talk about in regards to that is really going to blow your mind. But let's talk about overall, why is this an important nutrient? Why does it deserve a masterclass and a big understanding in our culture today? Well, the 2010 report published in Genome Research found that vitamin D influences several hundred genes, many of which control disease suppression or expression. So we've already hit on some kind of superficial things like we see with bone formation, with sexual health. These are just outpicturings of things. These are symptoms. These are conditions that get exacerbated below a much more powerful conversation, which is how vitamin D is an epigenetic controller. It's regulating what our genes are doing. According to the scientists in the study, vitamin D deficiency isn't just implicated in bone diseases. Vitamin D deficiency also increases our susceptibility to autoimmune conditions like multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, and type 1 diabetes. This is regulating and modulating, interacting with genes that code, that regulate autoimmune conditions. So it's not just osteoarthritis, it's also rheumatoid arthritis if we're talking about bone health, but also issues to do with our nervous system, for example, like MS. And also the researchers noted how vitamin D deficiency plays a role in dementia as well. So we're talking about a much, much deeper story here, much deeper understanding. So when we're talking about getting adequate amounts of sunlight, getting enough viable, usable vitamin D in our bodies, this is a really big deal. Now, how deep does this vitamin D equation go? How deep does the D go? Well, vitamin D receptors are actually found in nearly all, if not all, of the cells in the human body. Essentially, every cell in the human body has vitamin D receptors. That's how it's prominent. It's a prominent, in-demand nutrient for cellular function. Your body is looking to latch onto it, pretty much every cell. Now, every day, we have cells that mutate. And when that happens, vitamin D actually plugs into these mutated cells. It's one of the things that vitamin D is used for. And when that happens, it delivers instructions to the cell to repair itself, to fix the mutation and get back to being a healthy, normal, replicating cell. However, if that vitamin D plugging in doesn't give the instruction properly where the cell responds and fixes itself, it provides the instructions for the cell to take itself out, to basically have this process of apoptosis, this programmed cell death, and helping the cell to destroy itself so it doesn't lead to cancer. If we're deficient in vitamin D, however, there are going to be some issues with this very essential and vital process that's taking place, would be taking place in a normal setting if vitamin D is available. So let's keep digging into this. Researchers at the University of Oxford wanted to uncover the extent to which vitamin D interacts with our DNA. They used new DNA sequencing technology to create a map of vitamin D receptor binding across the human genome. The vitamin D receptor is a protein activated by vitamin D, which attaches itself to our DNA and thus influences what proteins are made from our genetic code. Vitamin D is controlling which proteins are getting made from our genetic code. Not many nutrients that we've identified have this capacity. To even label it as a simple nutrient is a gross oversimplification. It is powerful. It's affecting our genes. So let's look at this in relationship to cancer. Since vitamin D is kind of stepping in and giving the instruction, plugging into the cell, the vitamin D receptor in the cell, if it mutates, to give it instructions to fix itself or that programs cell death. Vitamin D is a well-noted immunomodulator. Now, this is a very important term because immunomodulation means the ability of the immune system to have an intelligent function where it can heighten or increase its activity if need be, or lower its activity if need be. If we're talking about a situation of autoimmunity, this is when the immune system is overreactive. And so we want to help the immune system to be a little bit more subdued and bring it down, get it back to a baseline and not hyperactive. Whereas we're talking about a situation with defending the body against an infection or against cancer, we want a heightened immune response to be able to take out the rogue cancer cells or infectious, cells that have been infected. And so looking specifically at cancer, there are several meta-analyses studying the effect of vitamin D and cancer, like the one published in the American Journal of Public Health. The researchers found that vitamin D has a protective effect in lowering cancer risk and, as the researchers stated, lowering cancer mortality, quote, at low cost with few or no adverse effects, unquote, going up against several of the most prominent, most deadly forms of cancer, the most rampant forms of cancer, everything from breast cancer to colorectal cancer, the list goes on and on. Vitamin D has been shown in big meta-analyses time and time again to prevent and even help as a form of treatment. How often are you hearing this message? Because the key is, let's not have the cancer in the first place, primarily. And vitamin D is involved in that process of that cellular intelligence. Because each and every day we have thousands of mutations that take place during the process of cell replication. Each and every one of us has cancer cells that develop every day. But a healthy, robust, naturally functioning immune system with vitamin D being at the helm can identify these cells, help them to fix themselves, or trigger apoptosis, where the cell can destroy itself and we're not allowing it to grow, and having a cancer cell to have the time to latch on and have angiogenesis, right? So latching on to blood vessels where it can start to feed itself and get nutrient supply and blood flow and manifesting itself into a larger tumor or the like. So all of this process, it starts with let's prevent it from taking place in the first place and getting out of hand. Vitamin D is a big component. And I want you to take this piece of data, utilize it for yourself and your loved ones, because the data exists. It is so thick. It is so heavy on how important vitamin D is in this equation of our immune function, cancer prevention, and so much more. Now, again, in regards to vitamin D being an immunomodulator, right now, our immune system is a big topic of conversation. So at this point, we're going to look at the peer-reviewed evidence regarding COVID-19 and vitamin D. We're going to start with a peer-reviewed study published in Scientific Reports. And it took a set of people with confirmed cases of COVID-19 who had no symptoms. And these were folks categorized in Group A. And they tested their vitamin D levels. And they also looked at people with COVID-19 who were suffering from severe symptoms, and they were categorized as Group B. Tested their vitamin D levels, and here's what they found. The scientists uncovered that the people with severe symptoms were significantly more deficient in vitamin D than people without any symptoms at all. It was one of the things that really jumped out at the researchers. It raised some eyebrows. The conversation started to get around at how this association might be something for us to investigate more. And so many other studies have come out since, digging in deeper and looking at this. Now, the researchers stated that, quote, the fatality rate was high in the vitamin D deficient Group B. Vitamin D level is markedly low in severe COVID-19 patients. Inflammatory response is also high in vitamin D deficient COVID-19 patients. This all translates into increased mortality in vitamin D deficient COVID-19 patients, unquote. Now, this is just one of dozens of studies that we now have, and mirroring the conclusion of almost 24 other peer-reviewed studies. The scientists stated, quote, we recommend mass administration of vitamin D supplements to populations at risk for COVID-19, unquote. They recommended mass administration. Prior to all of this stuff and the drugs coming on the market, all these things. But did you hear about this on the news? Did you hear that scientists were recommending mass administration of vitamin D because they could see right there in black and white that folks who are deficient in vitamin D, the likelihood of severe symptoms is exponentially higher. As a matter of fact, people with sufficient levels of vitamin D, were far more likely to have no symptoms at all. But yet you don't hear that on the news. You don't see the government agencies rushing to get something that is incredibly inexpensive to citizens, especially those who need it, who might not have money. That didn't happen. Why? Well, you very well know the answer to that already. We're talking about multi-billion-dollar industries that are designed and built on the farming of sick people and continuously creating synthetic pharmaceuticals to treat the symptoms that result from abnormal diet and lifestyle interactions. And one of those lifestyle interactions being getting adequate sunlight. And so we've got a drug for that. We got a drug to treat the osteoarthritis. We've got a drug to treat the autoimmune condition. How about we address the underlying cause? Vitamin D is critical in this equation, right? And it's inexpensive. As a matter of fact, it's free if you go outside. But there's nuance there, and we're going to talk more about that. So we're not seeing commercials to encourage Americans and really citizens all over the world, but specifically Americans who are the most vitamin D deficient, one of the most vitamin D deficient populations, to make sure that they get their vitamin D up, to make sure that they're going out is critical right now. We've got peer-reviewed evidence on this, dozens of studies on how important this is. But what you will see is commercials for synthetic pharmaceutical drugs to treat symptoms, right? So they're going to treat your erectile dysfunction, right? If you're trying to watch the game and then they got the guy, he's on the boat with this lady and, here's, erectile dysfunction hindering your life, vitamin D, all right? This drug has, and the crazy part is they're on the boat and it shows like they're on a boat having a good time. It says it's got this benefit. Ask your doctor for the drug. Ask the dealer. Is that even appropriate to ask your doctor for the drug that you want? That sounds like a different kind of relationship, all right? But then what they go on to have is this long list of side effects, right? Blindness, seizures, heart failure, kidney disease, death, right? They'll slide death in there, right? All from taking this substance that's designed to treat a symptom and it's not addressing the underlying cause of the condition in the first place. All right, so I want to start to encourage us to look through the lens when we see these things to see it for what it is. This is window dressing. This is superficial. Everything has its place. Pharmaceutical medications can be life-saving in the right instances, but oftentimes the vast majority is designed to treat symptoms of the diseases that are caused from the way that we live our lives. Instead of removing the cause of the disease, we treat the symptom. And this is what keeps people in this very vicious and deadly circle, where today we have 70% of citizens in the United States are already on pharmaceutical drugs. We have the most drugged out culture in history. And yet we have the sickest, most diseased, obese society in history at the same time. The drugs aren't working because they were never meant to work. They're not designed to work. They don't work. Now, when I say that we are the sickest nation in history, I mean self-inflicted. All right? We have 242 million Americans right now. 242 million Americans are overweight or obese. We're getting close to 50% of our citizens being clinically obese. Half of our population. It doesn't even make sense. It doesn't even register how severe this issue is. And I've never met one person from my family, growing up in a family where most of my family members are obese growing up. In my clinical practice, I never met one person who didn't want to be healthy. It's just a matter of education, access, culture. We have a culture of sickness. Man, so many of my family members, of course, they're on medication, they're on drugs. As a matter of fact, I lost the love of my life. My grandmother, who taught me unconditional love, she died from an overdose. So I take this really seriously. This isn't something to just play with. Right? We've accepted this as normal. It's not normal. It's not normal. We need to stop treating symptoms, which again, the common thing is you get another prescription to treat the symptom from the other drug. And I know this firsthand. It happened with me. Once I finally got this diagnosis, so we know that I broke my hip when I was a kid, but eventually I get this degenerative disease diagnosis. So my bone density is extremely low, arthritic condition of my spine. And so I'm on all these medications now. And one of the medications created a symptom that I didn't even know until years later. So I was on Celebrex for this arthritic condition. And I started having it didn't have a name yet. That's the thing. Once it gets its name, then you can create a fear around it. And so my symptom was restless legs, which it wasn't a thing yet. All right. So this is like way back in the day. This is a couple of decades ago now. But I'm laying down in bed at night. I'm trying to get a little shut eye, but it feels like my legs want to just get up and go without me. And it's just I didn't know what was happening in my life. I didn't know that was a thing, right? I just felt like I needed to relax. Like, oh, I'm not relaxing, but it felt like, when they do that magic show thing and then they have the person get into the box and they saw them in half and then their legs are like doing their thing. It felt like that. Like my legs were like off doing their thing. And I'm trying to lay here. Caused by Celebrex. It's one of the side effects. Little did I know. And so then you get a medication for the restless leg syndrome and you just get into that vicious circle. So reeling this all the way back in, I want to really point to the necessity. Vitamin D was being implored by scientists, mass administration. We got sound data on this. It's safe. It's safe at extremely high amounts that you can add in to help to reduce these symptoms and reduce susceptibility. It's safe and very inexpensive. Mass administration, nope, you didn't hear about that. But you'll hear about the commercial for, getting a 17-hour boner, through whatever new drug. Well, that's a side effect. You don't want that. Report that to your doctor, all right? Or dip it in some cold water. I don't know. In April, some of the first data coming out, published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, they were finding already that upwards of 90% of the folks who were experiencing severe symptoms or losing their lives upwards of 90% of these folks had 50% of them had one comorbidity. The other 50% had two or more, essentially. And those three comorbidities or additional causes of death were hypertension, diabetes, and obesity. And so I'm just like, guys, we're in trouble. We are a nation that is we are the sickest nation in the history of humanity, self-inflicted, to be clear, self-inflicted. Mm-hmm. We have over 200 million people who are overweight or obese. Right now, here in the United States, it's a number we can't really even, it doesn't make sense. And within the next 10 years, half of the population will be clinically obese. And this is well known in the data. We have a problem. 60% of the United States population has some degree of heart disease already. 135 million people are type 2 diabetic or pre-diabetic right now. And right now here in America, already about 70% of the population are already on pharmaceutical drugs, but that method hasn't worked. Everything keeps getting worse. All the problems are worse. And so seeing this data, and I shared this very early on. I was like, hey, these issues that make us susceptible to all manner of infectious diseases, we have to fix this. And people, of course, the majority of people who we ride with, they're like, yes, this is absolutely true. This is not getting talked about. But there's that small percentage of people, they're like, well, it's too bad we can't get people healthier overnight. Guess what? It's been almost a year now. We're knocking on the door of a year. Wouldn't now be a good time to shift gears and let's talk about getting our citizens healthier? It'll never happen. It's never going to be a part of the conversation because it never was. Right. And so the CDC published a report, and this was just recently, and they affirmed what I said in the very beginning. 94% of the folks who lost their lives with this virus, confirmed cases of COVID-19, 94% of them have had an average of 2.6 pre-existing chronic diseases. 94% of them. But because of the framing of the media, we'll just focus on that 6%. Well, perfectly healthy people are dying too. What? 94%. Can we not talk about this? Can we not talk about it? And so, and actually, of course, like myself, I'll go and actually look at the data. I'll look at the reports. I'll look at the studies. And one of the other factors with that, so these are pre-existing chronic diseases and or comorbidities. And one of the major comorbidities was influenza. And like the flu just disappeared. But it's one of the comorbidities with folks. And it's just like, if it's COVID, it's COVID. It's end of story. And we should be talking about these things. Most importantly, in what I just said, the fact that we're so susceptible because we're already diabetes is an inflammatory condition. Obesity is an inflammatory condition. Heart disease is an inflammatory condition. And this particular virus, whatever your belief system is around the virus, it appears to have a tropism towards the lungs, right? Hyperinflammatory responding, because it's not the virus or any virus that creates the inflammation. It's your body's reaction to an exposure that creates, your body's doing the inflammation. It's trying to protect you. And so if you take a pre-inflamed individual and then they become exposed to something that creates hyperinflammation, what do you think is going to happen? But nobody's talking about how can we help to reduce the inflammation that we're experiencing with these chronic diseases, because we never did, Aubrey. Like, this is just something the system doesn't do. And again, we're like, okay, we're going to get a drug to fix it. We're going to get a drug to fix our problems. And it's just not how stuff works. Just look at the data, that's the thing. And one of your guests before, he's just like, science isn't very scientific right now. And like, for me, that just really jumped out. I was like, that's perfectly said. Very simple. And, at this time, having data like that, any person who is just having just a modicum of logic and seeing like 94% of the folks who've lost their lives, whatever you believe about this particular illness, had a 2.6 pre-existing chronic diseases. And to say like this is something we can't do something about, to say that this is something that's okay, that our citizens are so susceptible and so sick, and just ignore that and take another drug, it is so inappropriate. And we could do so much better. And this was the thing, last thing. I know you did too, and I know many folks listening, we just felt that we were better than this. And we're not. We're not. But we are. Let me be clear. We are, but we just don't know it yet. We are so much more. We are so much more capable of understanding and science and compassion and working together. But we're really getting to see the worst of us. We're getting to see our worst tendencies, and we're getting to see how strange and twisted things can be. You know, even with the censorship and all this stuff, science should not be censored. I had on the top cell biologist, you know, he's really the person who pioneered epigenetics as far as like getting into popular lexicon, Dr. Bruce Lipton. Two of his programs, he put so much into what he does, got taken down, you know, got censored. He's your favorite cell biologist, cell biologist, you know, favorite cell biologist. He's like your rapper's favorite rapper. When we're talking about epigenetics, when we're talking about virology, like this guy he's been teaching doctors for decades, you know, about cellular functioning and the immune system. It's just like, oh, his opinion doesn't matter right now. Shut him up because he has a perspective that doesn't fit into the popular narrative.
And that's what's really scary for me, is the idea that science is fixed, which it never has been, not once. And we're talking about these things that never has been, but all of a sudden science has a capital S and it's a fixed singular opinion. It can't be. The respiration for science, what allows it to breathe, is questioning alternate hypotheses, weighing out different theories, looking at different factors, looking at where there's things that we could kind of grab a hold of and start to understand. But when you shut it down and just say science says nothing. Science is a process. Science is a method.
Yes.
You know, it is not a thing that speaks with a singular voice. It's a chorus of disparate ideas that sometimes find, you know, coherence and sometimes find resonance. But without the whole chorus being heard and everybody looking, you're inevitably going to be steered down the wrong path, as we have constantly throughout history. When we said sugar is fine, but fat is bad. I mean, that was one of these cases. Right. When we said, oh, you know, all the ulcers in your stomach, that's caused from stress. And some doctor was like, no, it's not, caused by H. pylori. And they're like, shut up. And he's like, I'm telling you. And they're like, shut up. And then he finally had to drink the beaker himself. And like, this is the way it goes. Like, people have to speak counter to the narrative, because there was billions of dollars wrapped up in antacids and billions of dollars in all of these treatments. And actually, you know, these gastric surgeries that were good, the machine gets rolling, and it's so necessary for there to be these other voices that come out and challenge that and look at all the different factors. And going back to what we're experiencing now, I just saw a recent study that says there was a correlation between vitamin D deficiency and serious negative outcomes regarding COVID, and a strong correlation. Now, correlation isn't causation, you know, but that's something to take a look at. Let's just allow the process. Let's allow everybody to talk about, all right, we see a strong correlation here. What can we do? You know, how can we support our people to make sure that they're not vitamin D deficient? Because there's a good chance that this is playing a part in the system that we have, along with all of the food, along with everything else. And unfortunately, you know, and you got to look at why, and the why is, you know, I think very simple. A lot of people have to say it's a conspiracy. I don't think it's a conspiracy. It's just a self-serving bias. When you have a giant reward, like there's a recent article said 32 billion is going to go to Moderna and Pfizer. You have a $32 billion prize. If you have that in your company, however good your fucking employees are, if you're like, there's $1 million for someone who can do this thing, guess what? It's going to challenge them. They're going to, maybe a few won't abide by it, but some will. It's just self-serving. You'll be able to shift your understanding of how the world works and what morality is and what's right. It'll just filter through your brain in a way that's going to serve you in the best way. So no conspiracy necessary. No deep state necessary. Maybe it exists. I don't fucking know, but it's not necessary. All you have to know is that people are going to look at the way that the world is in a way that's going to serve them the best. And I think that's really what we're experiencing here. But people aren't seeing that, you know, at the very simplest level.
Yeah, I love what you said, man. Science is a process. And throughout history, we continue to really go at the throat of people who go against the popular narrative with science, even though they have, quote, science to back up and affirm what they're saying is real. You know, like there were things taught in universities that were absolutely absurd today, you know, about, for example, where we fit in the galaxy. stuff revolving around us. Like the guy's like, you know what? Actually, the sun's the center of the, sorry, kill him. They're like, no, he's got to go. Kill him. He can't be, you know what? And same thing, today, one of the holy trinity of protection is to wash your hands. Dr. Inez Semmelweis, he's the one who brought that forward. And the medical establishment went after him. They called him a lunatic. They said there was no grounds. And he studied it. He reported. He did tests. He tracked and he found out, hey, guys, maybe after we're tinkering with these dead bodies and then we're like going and, giving birth, helping women to give birth, maybe we might want to, put a little water on our hands, wash a little bit of that off, and they were just like, this is the way we've done it. This is the way it's always been done. What are you talking about? And so, but now today it's become
well, and just to finish,
self-evident.
They threw him in a loony bin where the people in the loony bin were beating him and eventually wounded him. And then they believe that he died of sepsis because the people who were fixing the lacerations from him getting beaten for having this crazy idea that you should wash your hands after doing an autopsy before delivering a fucking baby, which is like obvious to us now, but they didn't have that understanding that germs could transfer. He thought it was little pieces of dead person that were on people's hands, which is actually pretty kind of accurate, like the bacterial pieces of the dead body of the decaying process were being transferred to these mothers. They threw him in a loony bin, they beat him, and then they didn't wash their hands when they were treating him, and he died of sepsis. I mean, how fucking horrible and ironic is that? But that's science with a capital S acting in a fascist and oppressive way. And there's a litany of examples of that. And I think we're going to look back, 10, 20 years from now, whatever, 5, maybe 3, who the fuck knows? We'll be like, dang, like
so
we really fucked up.
The question is, what are we doing that about right now? What are we doing that same thing? Because the popular narrative and what we talked about in the last episode, because when the treatment for what we're dealing with came along, this holy trinity, hand washing, social distance, and wear a mask, I just went into the data. I wanted to make sure that the masks are going to be an effective prevention metric without venturing into the ridiculous. And I might have shared this, or maybe it happened after we talked, but my neighbor, this was a 108-degree day. He went from his car, he's in his late 20s, he doesn't have an autoimmune disease. He went late 20s, early 30s, walked from his house to his car, full on gas mask with the two things right here, head to toe clothing, gloves, boots, mask, couldn't see anything with his face because he had the gas mask on because of fear, just to go from his door to his car.
Wow.
And I'm just like, what are we doing here? Is this actually based on reality, or are we going too far? And so I went to the data to find out what are the most effective metrics here so we can utilize masks in a way that makes sense without venturing into the ridiculous and creating a culture around us where this is a norm based on assumption or superstition and not based on science. And so I went into the data looking for okay, how can I find ways that this actually works? And I just kept being surprised over and over again because the randomized controlled trials, we already had pretty good data on this. Randomized controlled trials, this is the gold standard because we're looking at a specific intervention and a specific outcome versus what is being pressed in popular culture, popular media. These are based on theoretical models. This is based on theory. It's because we can see the image of when you're breathing out and you could see the mass is preventing the aerosols and droplets. And it's just look at it, see, clearly it works. But then how does this play out in the real world? Because here's the thing, if you can also see in that same special fancy imaging, if you could see the number of viruses that are actually in that room, you couldn't see anything else but viruses. We're swimming in them. There are hundreds of trillions. That number isn't even big enough. Just in the room that you're in right now, it's covering your entire body. It is the most permeate. As far as things here on this planet, there are more viruses than anything else on Earth. And we just don't get it. We're doing that thing where, like you said, it's a big ass capital science, and we're not understanding the basic tenet of how viruses exist in our world. We've become afraid of something that's invisible. And it's just like we keep looking, oh, well, we found the thing. We keep looking deeper and deeper and deeper. We found this is the thing that creates sickness. But the reality is very different. We, as human, when they did the Human Genome Project, mapped us out, we are 8% endogenous retroviruses. Even the ability for humans to reproduce and to have a placenta, that was designed and evolved from the work of viruses. Our immune system is rooted from viruses. Viruses created our immune system that defend us against viruses. These are all basic premises. And then, of course, it's just like, well, that's not a pathogenic virus. It's not a novel virus. And that was the thing that we were told in the beginning. We don't have an innate immunity to this. Well, there's also this thing called the adaptive immune system. And this is why, even as today, it's about 65 million confirmed cases of COVID, which again, that's all that's debatable. I get that. I'm just going with the numbers so we can communicate on what the popular narrative is. 65 million confirmed cases, about 1.6 million folks have lost their lives, which, by the way, sidebar, they've been relegated to numbers, a little ticker, little stock market ticker on the news that people, and I was just with some folks, they don't even see it. It's become normalized to them. I was like, guys, you don't see the number? They're like, no, I didn't even notice, because they sit and watch the fucking news. And so 65 million people, 1.6, 1.7 million folks have lost their lives. We don't say shit about the 64, 63 million people who are okay. We don't say anything about them. It's like it doesn't even exist. How do they survive? They didn't get the vaccine. It didn't come out yet. How did they make it? They have an immune system. It's what we're designed to do. And we're being taught, we're training an entire generation of humans with our children to not trust their bodies. We're training them to believe that they are not enough. When most folks honestly wouldn't have even known that this was a thing if it didn't have such a great system behind it. So many folks would have just went on about their lives and never realized that there was this thing going around. And what does the fear do? How has the fear affected our outcomes? And that's why I had Dr. Bruce Lipton on, again, renowned cell biologist, pioneer in epigenetics. His voice matters, his perspective matters. His science, what he's teaching, controls the rest of the sciences below it. And he shared the biology of fear and what happens. He went through step by step by step and showed it is one of the most powerful forces for suppressing our immune function. When you are afraid, and you've already taken the nocebo, that if you get exposed to this, if you even start to have symptoms, even if you don't have it, your outcomes are going to be worse. You could die. Being sick is no longer okay. People used to say, even if you sneeze, like you used to sneeze, people were like, oh, bless you. Now, if you sneeze, people are like, fuck you. God, fuck you. What happened? Like we're so afraid of the just really basic human functioning and our ability to operate in our environment. And part of that too, Aubrey, and just like saying the thing out loud, we don't understand that we are a part of nature.
Amen.
We have created this veil that separates us, but it's still, you could try and hide. You are a part of nature. There is no other animal out here running around trying to hide from something invisible. We've lost touch. And the great thing about us, this is the beauty about humans though, is that we can research and dig in and find the things that are happening behind the scenes. But we don't want to go to such an extreme that we're trying to kill all the viruses and the bacteria, not realizing that we are mostly that. We are made of over 400 trillion viruses that make us up. Many of them will kill you. They're pathogenic, or what we call opportunistic. We are carrying around things that can kill us just as fast, if not faster, right now. But if our immune system is not compromised, we're okay. And the question is, why do we carry those things? Everything has a role. There's a symbiotic nature. There's a symbiotic relationship. Some of these viruses might be assisting in creating, scaphoas for your gastrointestinal tract. They might be in assisting your immune function. They might be assisting in your ability to see. These are all things that we will learn as the years go on. And we keep coming to this place of like, actually, viruses are not as bad as we thought. They're actually very helpful. There are opportunistic things, but we need to keep things in balance. We've swung so far to the other side, we're trying to kill everything. And we know what happens when we did that with bacteria. The average human, and this is in Eat Smarter, and this is the beautiful part about Eat Smarter. This book is going to be at every Target store in America. It's going to be everywhere, and people are going to finally get, because there's a virility to books, they're going to get access to this information. And one of the things that I talk about that's directly correlated with our decline in health, but also our incline in obesity, is related to the decline in the diversity of our bacteria. It's direct. We got hard data on this. The average person here in America, looking at the microbiome diversity of somebody who's eating more of an indigenous diet, hunter-gatherer, they have 4 times to 10 times more diversity in their gut than we do. The analogy of looking at your microbiome like a rainforest, we have a lot of endangered species and a lot of stuff has gone extinct for us. And that has led directly, and we can talk more about this, of course, when there's a decline in your diversity of microbes, there's a direct increase in your rate of obesity. And also all manner of chronic diseases, your susceptibility skyrockets when the diversity goes down. We've spent the past few decades trying to kill microbes, trying to kill bacteria, trying to kill pathogens, things that we can't see, not realizing that when we drop that antibiotic into our gut, which I've been prescribed antibiotics myself when I didn't have a bacterial infection. This is common. It's still common today, even after all this. But just imagine for the decades prior, I would have patients coming into my office who've been on antibiotics for skin issues, for example, autoimmune related skin issues for 20 years. 20 years on antibiotics, like that's okay. If it's an antibiotic, it doesn't care what jersey the bacteria is wearing. It's coming to kill. It's coming to kill. It's like dropping a little microbe nuke off in your gut. How in the world do spicy foods turn up the heat in our mouth and in our bodies? How is that happening? And I'd imagine, I unconsciously thought this, that most folks would think that the quote burn of spicy foods is a form of taste. But again, it's more of a feeling. In fact, the two sensory experiences are related, so our taste and that feeling experience, which we'll talk about more, but they're also very distinct. Spicy foods innervate the tongue in the same way, interacting with the papillae. But there's an additional pain system that is triggered by compounds in spicy food that are located everywhere throughout the body, not just your tongue, so you can have the experience of this kind of thermal effect everywhere. Capsaicin is the main active ingredient in spicy food, and it binds to a special class of receptors inside of our mouth called VR1 receptors. Now, these are specialized pain receptors that respond to temperature extremes and intense mechanical stimulation, such as pinching and cutting, and it signals your brain to try to protect you from those things. These receptors also respond to very specific chemical influences, like those from capsaicin. So when we consume capsaicin, our central nervous system can be confused or tricked in a sense when these pain fibers get stimulated, as if something physically hot is touching your mouth. And you need to release the body's internal and external sprinkler system to help to put the fire out. And as you know, spicy foods can induce sweating, accelerate the heart rate, all kinds of system-wide changes can take place. So in essence, these pain receptors respond when you're drinking something that's too hot, for example. Maybe it's a coffee that's like scalding hot, and these pain receptors tell your brain, hey, back off. The same thing is happening. It's triggering the same receptors with spicy food, but it can be just enough where it's like, oh, this is a little bit too hot, or maybe too hot, or maybe extremely hot, and it gets painful, but it's nothing that's actually, because that pain receptor with something that's physically hot, for example, is trying to make sure that you don't melt your tongue or melt your biology, all the cells in your mouth. But the capsaicin can't actually do this. It's not actually melting anything, but it tricks your receptors into thinking that that's what's happening. Now, when these pain sensors get triggered, this also stimulates the release of endorphins, right? These feel-good compounds. This is part of the reason that spicy foods can be so attractive. They, in a strange way, make us feel good. Another interesting fact is that not only do different people have extremely different tastes and experiences as far as like feelings associated with food, but different animals sense flavors and stimulations from food differently as well. For example, it appears that birds don't register the effects of capsaicin like mammals do. Birds can peck on the hottest of hot peppers and not be bothered. All right. It's as if they evolved alongside some kind of a partnership with hot peppers so that the birds, because they're flying to different places, dropping off those leftovers from the peppers, dropping off those seeds, and they created like a little bit of a partnership because it's tricking your brain into thinking that it's physically hurting you, but it's not. All right, but for birds, they don't seem to be bothered. Now, again, birds can have the hottest of the hottest peppers. I remember I was at this restaurant and I was with some, weird like get along gang type of eclectic. I didn't know how I ended up there. All right. And we had the meal. Then at the end of the meal, they brought this little plate and it had this drop of fluid right in the middle of the plate, like a little sauce, like a little like dark burgundy sauce and a bunch of toothpicks. And I'm just like, what is this? This is already weird enough. The whole vibe of the thing is weird enough. I was traveling in from St. Louis to LA, funny enough. And this was probably, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. So much stuff was new to me. And so people start picking up the toothpick, people who were affiliated with this experience, and dipped it into the little dollop of sauce. Like it was tiny. It was like the size of smaller than a dime. Dipped it into the sauce and then put it on their tongue. And I'm like, I guess when in Rome, I guess. And so I did it. And then I put the dollop on my tongue. And it felt as if I was getting a full body tattoo once that stuff hit my tongue. And come to find out, it was some like crazy exclusive ghost pepper or some other kind. I don't even remember the name. What's beyond a ghost? It was a freaking, I don't know, vampire pepper. All right. It was like a whole different level. And I was like, how is this thing touching my tongue, making me feel stimulation on my skin, like on my arms? And so again, for us, we're getting this kind of interaction. And while a bird can consume, like literally just straight up eat one of those peppers, that just a little teeny bit of the fluid from it affected my body. So just keep that in mind, little fun fact. But how does this actually play out? Now, we're not talking about stuff that is like physically causing trauma to your body. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a little bit of spice. Let's keep it a little spicy. What kind of benefits can we extract from this unique compound? Well, a study published in the peer-reviewed journal Nutrients found that capsaicin supplementation actually improved risk factors for coronary heart disease, protection against heart disease. All right, that's really interesting that it has that kind of capacity. Well, there's another study that was published in 2016 where scientists concluded that capsaicin is actually able to increase the body's ratio of brown adipose tissue. It can actually help to nudge beige fat cells that can either become white adipose tissue, which is storage body fat, into being brown adipose tissue. So this is a type of body fat that burns fat. And again, we talked about these in depth on that episode detailing how metabolism works. So make sure to check out that episode after this one. But the bottom line is hot food, spicy food actually has this not just thermogenic effect where it's kind of increasing our metabolism temporarily, but literally shifting the ratio of body fat. So we got storage fats, we've got structural fats, and we've got fats that actually burn fat for fuel. So it's really, really cool stuff. Now, additionally, several studies have also noted capsaicin's incredible ability to help with pain relief. And this was really interesting too. A study from the Harvard School of Public Health found that people who eat spicy foods daily have about a 14% lower risk of death from all causes than people who eat spicy foods once a week. Now, the researchers analyzed the health and nutrition data from nearly 500,000 people in this particular study and found this interesting correlation. After accounting for several other influential factors, spicy food stood out somehow. Now, again, this isn't necessarily causation, but it's an interesting data point nonetheless. So spicy food is tied to improvements potentially with our body fat ratio, cardiovascular health, relieving pain, increasing endorphins, and also potentially adding to that recipe of extending our lifespan. Pretty cool stuff. So spicy foods, you can spice up just about anything. You could spice up adding peppers, and obviously it's something that's dried and used, like cayenne pepper, for example, for savory dishes, even combining it with sweet foods, having a little bit of cinnamon along with some chocolate. And cinnamon, for example, is actually something that's been utilized for quite some time. So we can think outside the box and utilize peppers, spicy peppers, cayenne pepper, and even whole peppers in different ways. All right, so again, from spicy to sweet, savory dishes, and just adding it in. If it feels good, add it in. A little spice can go a long way. Now, next up in our venture into the strange relationship that certain foods have on our bodies is another common one that many people experience. Have you ever been snacking on some fresh pineapple and experienced some stinging in your mouth? Or maybe a little bit of like pins and needles sensation, or maybe even some weird numbness? Well, there's a unique enzyme in pineapple called bromelain that has the remarkable ability to break down protein. In your mouth, all the structures in your mouth are made from protein. Your body truly is made from protein. These are, quote, the building blocks that make up our physical structure. And so in your mouth, bromelain has the ability to digest protein and break down protein. So in essence, when you're eating that pineapple, it's trying to eat you back. So when we're having this situation, this hit me and I'll hit you back situation taking place with pineapple, this is happening in our mouth. And so the question for me came up, well, what about the rest of my body? Like, what about the downstream effects with the pineapple since it's digesting protein? But once it hits your stomach acids and other compounds actually render bromelain harmless. And in fact, it helps it to become a potent anti-inflammatory nutrient in our bodies, according to data cited in the journal Clinical Immunology. Now, you might be wondering why a journal dedicated to immunology is investigating this pineapple compound in the first place. Well, another study published in the journal Cellular Immunology found that bromelain can actually act as an immunomodulator in the body, helping the immune system to increase or decrease itself based on kind of an upper level intelligence, a modulation, instead of just this one lane, like what happens with synthetic drugs, for example. It pushes your immune system in one direction. It either increases the immune system performance or it suppresses the immune system. Foods like pineapple, like bromelain, appear to have an immunomodulating capacity where it helps your immune system to modulate and to go up if it needs to, or even go down if it needs to. And when we're talking about why would it need to go down? Well, what if we're having an excessive immune response, right? Or an autoimmune reaction? There can be some potential here. And this is what they're studying with bromelain being able to help the immune system to reach a state of homeostasis and balance and improvement overall. Now, there are many other benefits that are seen with pineapples in the data. Another one, this is conducted by researchers at the University of Southampton in the UK, found that bromelain can be an effective treatment for osteoarthritis. Pretty cool. And also, again, just overall, pineapple is very high in vitamin C and antioxidants, and this may lean into why it's helpful for the immune system somehow. But more research is being done. Food has these really interesting capacities. So pineapple is one that's pretty easy to utilize. It might be with your favorite yogurt, for example, dairy or non-dairy versions. It might be something that you're adding in a fruit, a fruit mix, right? A fruit cocktail. I mean, let me be 100. I used to hate pineapple because it would come in a little fruit cocktail that you get at school. And it always it was not yellow. It was like translucent white. Like it was just like, what is that? And just threw the whole vibe out. If I was trying to eat the peach, it had the peaches, the grapes in there. The pineapple just was suspicious to me. But that's not real pineapple, all right? Fresh pineapple. And so there are many different ways to add it in. So quote, fruit salad, or just eating some, snacking on it just, just alone, adding it to different dishes. Again, I mentioned that it's something that breaks down protein. So it's been used historically for like tenderizing meat, for example, right? So you might think of like the luau, right? Shout out to everybody listening in Hawaii right now and being utilized that way. And also there are some weirdos out there putting pineapple on pizza, but you didn't hear that from me. All right. Shout out to everybody who likes pineapple on pizza. It might be me. I might be one of those weirdos. Probably not, but there's definitely somebody in my household who's a fan of pineapple on pizza. Not saying it's me, but it might be. All right. So pineapple is another one of those foods that has a very strange interaction with our body, but it also has some really remarkable benefits once we dive into the data. Now, our final strange interaction with foods and the human body seeks to answer the question, how are processed foods able to taste like things that they're not? So, for example, there's not actually any grapes in the grape soda, and there's not actually any chicken in the tofu chicken nuggets. How are we able to make things taste like things that they're not? Now, when it comes to grape soda, for example, I'm saying grape soda because that was my vibe. All right, that Vess grape soda, from where I'm from, it's a hood classic. All right, so having that as like something that I would go to quite often, the grape, the fruit punch, the strawberry soda, but the grape in particular has a little bit of a vibe, an essence of grape to it, but there's 0% grape juice in the grape soda. How are we able to do that? And by the way, it doesn't have to be perfect. The flavor notes don't have to match up perfectly to muddy up the waters in how foods are communicating with your brain. So how are they able to do this? There's something called a gas chromatograph that's able to, now we've been able to isolate flavors, isolate chemicals that denote flavors in foods. So food scientists have been able to use technology to isolate specific chemicals in foods and then put those chemicals into other things to make those things taste like things that they're not. All right. So making a chip taste like, there's like the chicken and waffles flavored potato chip, right? All these different crazy things that we're able to do. And again, this doesn't have to be perfect. Like the strawberry candy, the strawberry beverage doesn't have to taste exactly like a strawberry, but it's just enough to muddy up those waters of communication between the food stuff and your brain. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, we evolved eating food and having a very specific relationship to the flavors and nutrients in foods. And there's this phenomenon called post-ingestive feedback. All right, post-ingestive feedback. This is through our evolution. When we would consume a food, just say we consume a wild strawberry. When you would eat that wild strawberry, when our ancestors ate that wild strawberry, brought it into our system, this highly evolved, intelligent system, your physiology, your brain, and the mind in all of your cells is literally just kind of pulling out its own metaphorical notepad and writing notes that when I just ate this food and had this flavor, this strawberry flavor, a wild strawberry flavor, I got some vitamin C. I got some copper. I got these particular amino acids. And it's just literally taking notes, taking stored biological memory of what it got when it got this flavor. All right, so there's a post-ingestive feedback. Once we ingested the food, we get this feedback that these are the nutrients that come along with that flavor. And so whenever our bodies would become deficient in those nutrients, our physiology, our brain, our body, every cell in our body, we knew where to get that nutrient. where to get those nutrients because we would evoke a hunger or a craving for those foods. This is how cravings evolved. Cravings aren't a bad thing. This would dictate and determine and assist and support our food choices. But this highly evolved system has been manipulated by the food industry to make us crave all of these crazy things that have never existed before, and has, again, muddied up the water of this post-ingestive feedback, because now we have things that taste like other things, all right? And so there's another phenomenon called vanishing caloric density that's utilized by food scientists to manipulate our brains, because any strong flavor sensation, anything that really overwhelms your taste buds, we have a natural mechanism in our brains that trigger us to stop to the joy that we might be getting by having this food, to turn the pleasure off and start to make it not palatable. All right. So this is why, for example, you might not be able to eat a lot of fill in the blank food. So maybe it's that pineapple that we talked about earlier. There's only so much pineapple. Again, the pineapples have been kind of manipulated over time as well to be sweeter and all that stuff. But there would be a shutoff mechanism in our brain. It's like, okay, it's enough sugar. It's enough of these nutrients. And also, of course, the pineapple is going to start hurting you after a while anyways. So these are all in the natural rhythm of things. But with this vanishing caloric density, food scientists have found a way to make, for example, a Cheeto, right? To make a Cheeto, which is an incredibly potent flavor sensation, to only trigger stimulation of a certain category of brain cells. Just enough to tickle them just enough, then adding in some other notes over here and creating this perfect combination where you can keep eating it and eating it and eating it and not really even realizing that you've tore through a whole bag of these things, right? You might have consumed hundreds of calories, but your brain is essentially tricked into thinking that it hasn't gotten many calories at all, because it's another post-ingestive feedback is the amount of energy that's coming in from the food. And so your brain is even getting tricked to like, this is just air, just some chewing on some air, right? Keep eating. So this is just another one of those ways that our interactions with food often go on behind the scenes. Like, why are we doing the thing that we're doing? Why do we have this relationship with these particular categories of foods that we call processed foods? What's happening there? What's happening behind the scenes? And these are one of the things that we really need to address as a culture to help to move away from these things, to restore optimal function, to restore that true post-ingestive feedback and our powerful relationship with food and what our bodies really need. Because the reality is we've been manipulated. These food manufacturers have been manipulating our systems and creating a situation where our systems and our biology and the release of, these different feel-good chemicals and dopamine has really run amok. We didn't land on Cheetos. Cheetos landed on us. So if you saw this, you see I did the Denzel Washington finger if you saw that. But it's true. These things have really taken over our culture. And how do we fix it? This is so simple. It's simple, but it's not necessarily easy because, again, it's immersed itself. It's really entangled itself into our culture. But a simple return to a healthy, quote, normal palate, normal interaction with real food takes place when we remove the abnormal foods. It's literally that simple. Healing starts to take place. Intelligence starts to reign supreme again. We remove the cause of the dysfunction. There is a specific microbiome cascade, a microbiome makeup that is correlated with obesity, insulin resistance, and excessive body fat gain. All right? Increased weight gain, increased body fat, and insulin resistance. And I can tell that without ever even seeing the person. When I get the report back and look at the makeup of their microbiome, I can have a pretty good indication of whether or not they're obese just by looking at the bacteria cascade. And so knowing this, when researchers found the cascade that was associated with obesity, insulin resistance, they took those samples from human test subjects and implanted them into mice these, quote, fat bacteria. And they took samples from lean human, quote, normal human test subjects and implanted them into mice. Those mice that received the implant from the lean human subjects, or the microbiome makeup associated with leanness, stayed lean. However, the mice who received the, quote, fat bacteria associated with obesity, these, quote, fat bacteria caused the mice to become insulin resistant, gain weight and gain body fat. Changed nothing else about the mouse's diet. Simply changing the microbiome makeup caused them to gain more weight and become insulin resistant. Our microbes are controlling our metabolism at the absolute front lines. And this just makes sense. They're right there at that action point, the interaction point between the outside environment, the food you put in your body, and the food getting into you. Because in a strange way, your gastrointestinal tract is not necessarily you in one perspective. It's a tube from your mouth to your anus, all right? To Uranus. Shout out to Jupiter and all that whole thing going on. But it's a tube from your mouth to your anus. And within that tube, you can just think of it like a hose. Your body is surrounding that hose and your microbes. And what the activity that happens within that hose is determining what actually gets into your body itself, right? What gets into your, quote, human tissues and your bloodstream. And so the intelligence of those microbial communities and the management of all that, truly, again, they're the front line in making those decisions about digestion of nutrients, assimilation of nutrients, and elimination as well. All right, so we need to pay more attention to this incredible world that we term our microbiome. And so the microbiome is not just bacteria, right? We have the human virome, right, which is made up of viruses. And we also have the mycobiome, all the associated fungi in that kingdom as well that make us up. We have trillions upon trillions upon trillions of these different organisms. We have upwards of 400 trillion viruses that are a part of our makeup. And this is so important for us to understand right now. We're at war with viruses. We're at war with bacteria. And we neglect to realize that this is who we are. We're made of these things. Of course, they're opportunistic, pathogenic. These are labels that we give them. But the question is, why do they exist? Why do all of us carry pathogenic viruses in and on our bodies 100% of our days here on planet Earth? Viruses that can make us sick. They're called opportunistic. And in a sense, they wait for our immune system to be compromised, and then they can take over. They can create sickness. And the question is, why would nature have this kind of built into the system? It's not necessarily to hurt us. Many of these opportunistic, quote, opportunistic organisms, in some strange way, oftentimes they're giving us some benefit. They might be producing, many of these microbes produce vitamins and minerals in us for us. As I mentioned earlier, producing short chain fatty acids, the majority of that is not coming through our diet. And what actually is utilized by our bodies are produced by our microbes. All right, so it's this wonderful balance. It's this wonderful symbiotic relationship that we've evolved over time that our conventional medicine, our conventional system of healthcare is simply not paying attention to. It's like it doesn't exist, but this is the cutting edge of science. It absolutely exists. Right now, we have about 2 pounds of microbes in our bellies. I know it's super weird. It is definitely a little weird, but again, it's a symbiotic relationship. It's how we're designed. We evolved from these single-celled organisms. We evolved from viruses. As a matter of fact, our immune system is built from viruses. It evolved initially from a virus integrating itself with our, quote, human DNA, our human genes. So much so, this happened so long ago that when the Human Genome Project was done, they found that the human genome itself is 8% virus. We're 8% endogenous retroviruses, all right? We wouldn't even be human without viruses. Viruses are what enabled us to evolve to have the human placenta, to be able to have a human birth, what we refer to as a human birth, versus we'd be laying eggs. We'd be laying eggs if it wasn't for viruses. It's so weird. I'll be like, hey, babe, did you lay that egg today? You trying to have me fertilize it? This brings a whole different meaning to the word nesting. All right. We'd be nesting like crazy. But viruses helped us to integrate and to create the human beings that we are today. All right. So to be at war with viruses is to be at war with ourselves. We have to understand the nature of these things. And we keep getting more powerful and more powerful and more powerful microscopes to try to discover what is the thing that's making us sick. And we already destroyed so much of what makes us human by going after what we refer to as, quote, germs. Right? This war on germs, this war on bacteria. Once we found the bacteria, researchers went nuts. Science shifted so much to this germ theory of disease and started just destroying our terrain, destroying our microbiome with haphazard use of antibiotics and all of these insane products that we use in our homes and to grow our food, as we're going to talk about today. So I just want to reiterate this point again and again and again until we really get this. We have to look at things from a meta perspective, to zoom out and look at the big picture. And of course, we can dive in and look at the minutia, absolutely. But the truth is, we are existing here in this earth bubble all together with all of these things. We're in a glorified, gigantic snow globe. All right. There is not something happening on the other side of this snow globe that isn't affecting us. We're all connected. In fact, one of the studies that I shared on a recent episode of the show found that there are billions of virus particles that rain down from the atmosphere every single day. Billions within a very small 3 by 3 foot measured space of the earth. Many of these virus particles are coming from different states, different countries, traveling through the atmosphere, in the clouds, across continents, across oceans. Truly, we are all connected. We really are. So we have to understand what's controlling things at a much bigger level. Zoom out and look at the bigger picture. And part of it is the association, having a level of health and resilience and a robust immune system, a robust, healthy, sovereign human being, a sovereign human organism, so that we are not taken down when we interact with pathogenic organisms. All right. Ultimately, that's how we're designed. We face off against new viruses, new bacteria, new fungi. Our immune system is called the adaptive immune system, adapts to it. We don't just have an innate immunity or innate immune system, we also have the adaptive immune system. And this is how we develop and continue to evolve. But so much of what we're exposed to today has been demolishing our ability to adapt to our environment. And our environment is very abnormal in and of itself. And so we're diving in today and looking at this ecology, really. If you want to give the analogy of your microbiome being like a rainforest. A rainforest has a diverse array of different species. And this is what we have. We have countless different species of microbes, and many of them we haven't even identified yet. And again, just like a rainforest, we can have endangered species that are important for the overall sustainability of the environment itself. And also we can have things that go extinct, that damage everything. And if you look at the data, and this is one of the studies that we highlighted in Eat Smarter, looking at the microbes or the microbiome makeup of folks who are eating more of an indigenous diet, right? More of a hunter-gatherer diet, they have 4 times more microbial diversity, 5 times more microbial diversity than the average person here in America. When we talk about, we'll just say you have 100 trillion different viruses. We'll just say we have 100 trillion different microbes. 4 or 5 times more diversity. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. What happens when we don't have it? Well, these are the things we're going to be talking about today. So one of the other points of emphasis in this microbiome body fat connection is the relationship between your microbes, your gut, and your brain, right? The gut-brain connection has a huge impact on the microbiome / gut body fat connection. And this is highlighted by researchers at Yale University School of Medicine. Understanding first and foremost, your vagus nerve connecting your gut and your brain, they uncovered that the vagus nerve communicates information between your gut and your brain about the volume and type of nutrients you have available in your body. And depending on your nutritional status, the function of your vagus nerve can directly inhibit or stimulate calorie absorption and nutrient absorption. This connection can literally tell your gut and all associated aspects of the gut, including the microbes, to stop the assimilation of calories. It can inhibit that process, or it can stimulate it to absorb more calories just based on that connection. And remember, your gut is your brain's second in command in many ways, and they're constantly feeding information back and forth. And inflammation, and this is what we talked about on the recent episode and really dive into in Eat Smarter, can severely mess up this communication, can severely damage this process. Inflammation being from the Latin word meaning to set on fire, all right? It's burning down that cord, it's burning down that connection. And these are some of the other things we're going to discuss and dive into today. So going back, and as we move forward and talk about some of the new data that we're going to cover today, when we talked about the, quote, fat bacteria being implanted into mice from humans, being implanted into mice and causing the mice to become insulin resistant, gain weight, and gain body fat, this is all well noted now at this point to be happening in humans. And one of the very best studies done was using identical twins and seeing what happens when there's a change in their microbiome compared to their sibling and how that affects their metabolism. Now, these are, again, this is identical twins. They have the same DNA. This is not fraternal. This is not like the twins, like the movie twins, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Danny DeVito. It's not that variance, all right? I remember that scene when Danny DeVito saw Arnold with his shirt off. And he was like, look at your chest, it's swollen. I just thought that was funny. I think he said, it looks like you were stung by bees or something. He had never seen those chesticles like that. Shout out to Arnold. But again, this was done on identical twins. Identical. They came in the game, same egg. They had that 2 yolk jump off, all right? Same egg, same DNA. On paper, same people, but fun fact, they have a unique fingerprint and they have a unique metabolic fingerprint. Highlighted by scientists at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis, Missouri, set out to find if changes to the microbiome could affect fat loss in sets of identical twins. Shockingly, they discovered that if one twin had a higher ratio of the bacteria Firmicutes and a lower ratio of Bacteroidetes, they absorbed more calories than the other twin and were more apt to gain fat while eating the exact same diet. The makeup of our microbiome matters. The makeup of our microbiome matters. If you're wondering, what is the Firmicutes and the Bacteroidetes? These are categories of various microbes. And a study published in BMC Microbiology found that individuals who are obese have a significantly higher level of the bacteria Firmicutes and a lower level of Bacteroidetes compared to normal weight and lean adults. And it's proposed that a higher ratio of Firmicutes in their intestines make them more efficient at metabolizing and absorbing calories. All right, this is a big player here. Our microbes are making decisions. They're right there at the front. They're like gatekeepers. All right, I'm thinking about the show Avatar that I watched with my son. All right, Avatar. They're these gatekeepers who are deciding whether or not they can escape, persecution, escape danger, and get on these boats and be able to go to this land that's more protected. All right, and some of the people got a little attitude. All right, they're at the gates causing problems. Other people are they're cool. So our microbes are taking notes. They're checking the passports. They're checking your information of the food that's coming in. They're determining what's getting in and what's not. This matters. This isn't talked about in conventional diets, and I'm done with it. I'm so done. It hasn't helped us. There are wonderful diet frameworks that exist now. Absolutely. And underneath the surface, they're actually fixing some of these issues that are governing what's happening with our metabolism for some people. For some people, but not for everybody, because every diet framework is not going to work for every person. We are so unique. We all have a unique metabolic fingerprint. Our metabolism that we have right now at this moment, as you're listening to this, your metabolism, your makeup of microbes is unique to you, and no one in the history of humanity has ever had a metabolism like yours, and nobody in the future ever will. And yourself next week will not have a metabolism like you have right now. The future you, the Michael J. Fox, both sides, future and past, not the same as you right now. It's constantly changing and in flux and dynamic and fluid. And that's what health really is. Health isn't a destination that you arrive at. Health is really something that you cultivate and you attract to you continuously. It's continuously coming to you and manifesting from you by the person that you become. And the principles that you live by determine the outpicturing of your health. And so this is what Eat Smarter is about, is giving us these fundamental principles that every human being should have the right to know. The things that are regulating what's happening with their bodies as they're consuming their various foods, and giving them permission to eat foods that are right for them. Not based on dogma, not based on right or wrong, and eliminating the fear. There's so much fear around food today as well. So we're addressing all of these things. But again, we're diving in deep today in them guts. All right, we're diving in deep into the microbiome. So we're just highlighting a couple in that balance of firmicutes and bacteroidetes. But there's so much more. Now, in addressing this issue, how do we optimize our gut health to optimize our metabolism? The first principle, the most important principle that is often neglected in our healthcare system, in conventional medicine, that brought in $4 trillion, $4 trillion in 2019 in our healthcare system, and yet everything got worse. Every single disease got worse. Heart disease, cancer, obesity, diabetes, Alzheimer's, arthritis, autoimmune issues, everything keeps getting worse. More money's getting poured into it because they're not abiding by principle number one. Remove the cause of the disease. Remove the cause of the problem. I don't want to start this episode in how to optimize our gut health by telling you here, take this thing, add this thing in, have this food, have this nutrient. It's not going to matter if we don't remove the thing that's hurting the microbiome in the first place. All right? That's like taking one step forward and two steps back. We have to remove the cause first. So what is contributing to the degradation of our microbiome? This issue, this dysfunction with our microbiome is driving the obesity epidemic below the surface. It's a main driver of what's happening. So why? Why is this taking place right now, and what can we do to fix it? This today is very important, and I believe that this will spark, and the awareness around eating smarter is going to help to shift this for our culture, because enough is enough. One of the things that's dramatically damaging the health of our microbiome are pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, rodenticides. And we have the proof now. For instance, a recent study published in the journal Chemosphere uncovered that the intake of one of our most widely used pesticides, called chlorpyrifos, can promote obesity and insulin resistance through influencing our gut and gut microbiota. And this should be front page news. But nobody's talking about this. What's actually contributing to our obesity epidemic? What we're exposed to coming through our food supply every single day. But there's so many far-reaching, detrimental things happening with the use of these chemicals. Chlorpyrifos was invented as an alternative to the pesticide DDT, which itself was a substitute for toxic lead called arsenate used with growing food, and has become a part of a pattern known as, quote, regrettable substitution. It's what we do. It's like from the line from the Suicide Squad, Harley Quinn.
We're bad guys. It's what we do.
When she's like breaking in to, stealing some jewelry on a whim. They're bad guys. It's what they do. They're not going to substitute with something that is life affirming. They keep trying to drug their way out of solving our problems. Better living through chemistry. And we continue to be hurt and hurting our citizens. And what's happening behind the scenes, listen, we'll dive even deeper. Chlorpyrifos works by attacking insects' nervous systems and has been repeatedly shown to create side effects in people working on farms. According to researchers at Columbia University, one of the most devastating issues is seen in pregnant women exposed to chlorpyrifos, finding that it led to significant impairment in the development of their children's brains. Pregnant women working on farms using this chemical had a skyrocketing rate of miscarriage as well. It's not okay. We need to stop this. Now, how does this affect all of us? This isn't just about pregnant women. Clearly, it's going to be hurting us in other ways. Well, the human gut itself, the researchers noted that this particular pesticide is designed to attack the nervous system of insects. The microbes and cells that make you up are even smaller than insects. The human gut itself is a mass of neural tissue. So again, the pesticide is targeting the nervous system. Our gut itself is made of a mass of neural tissue filled with 30 types of neurotransmitters, just like the brain. Because of the massive amount of brain-like tissue found in the gut, it has rightfully earned the title of being the second brain. The gut, the human gut, is referred to as the second brain, technically known as the enteric nervous system. And this second brain that we all have in our bellies consists of around 100 million neurons, more than either the spinal cord or even the peripheral nervous system. And these pesticides are designed to target and destroy the nervous system. Clearly, it's been banned by now, right? Nope. There's been massive litigation going back and forth. It was on track to getting banned. But lobbyists, these chemical companies, they're not trying to have a hit to their pocketbook. They got a good thing going. They finessed their way into getting it pulled back from being banned. Now it's supposed to be banned again, but now it's just caught up in the red tape. It's that red tape. And our citizens are suffering. Now you might think, okay, well, this is just one. We get this banned, but it's the same thing in the way that we're growing our food. It's not just this one. There are more than 34,000 pesticides derived from over 600 synthetic chemicals that are registered by the EPA for use here in America. EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, huh? We're bad guys. It's what we do. They're not trying to help you. These systems are corrupt. They're not looking, how would they allow 34,000 pesticides? The data exists. In addition, there's 85,000 more chemicals that are regulated separately under the Toxic Substance Control Act. 85,000. And what is this doing directly to our microbes? What are these pesticides doing directly to our microbes? Most citizens are easily consuming hundreds of synthetic chemicals every year that are wreaking havoc on their nervous system, their endocrine system, and damaging their microbiome. Our bacteria can literally store memories, respond to and create electrical signals, and communicate with each other. That sounds pretty close to a nervous system to me. A study published in the journal Scientific Reports revealed that pesticides create a pro-inflammatory state in the gut and disrupt microbial gene expression. This isn't an inert thing. This here, we have to remove the cause so that we can heal. The human body has an innate intelligence. It will start to heal if we remove the cause. We can't just start throwing drugs at it. That's what conventional medicine does, and it sucks at it. If you look at the rate of everything, has gotten worse because they're treating a symptom instead of removing the cause. Let's treat the symptom of high blood pressure with lisinopril instead of removing the cause of the high blood pressure, which the Journal of the American Medical Association affirmed. The leading cause of hypertension is poor diet. Sex appears to be protective of the number one killer in our society. Heart disease ends approximately 630,000 lives every year. This past year, nearly 700,000 people died from heart disease. Now, part of longevity is not dying. And so addressing this number one killer in our culture is of the utmost importance. And sex appears to have a hand in this. A 16-year study published in the American Journal of Cardiology, conducted with over 1,000 male participants aged 40 to 70, found that men who had sex at least twice a week were almost 50% less likely to die from heart disease than men who had sex once a month or less. Now, there's many factors that go into this when looking at the connection between sex and cardiovascular health. But, it's so interesting that connection, love, even sex is related to the heart. And to stretch this out even further and looking not just at cardiovascular health, but overall immune system function and immune system performance, there's an interesting connection between sex and immune health as well. A study presented at the Eastern Psychological Association Convention in 1999 found that study participants who had sex once or twice a week had higher levels of the antibody immunoglobulin A, or IgA, compared with participants who got busy less often. Now, IgA is found in saliva and the mucosal linings, and it's one of the very first defenses that our bodies have when protecting ourselves from infections. It's one of the very first frontline immunological weapons that we have is IgA, and this is enhanced through sex. And according to the researchers at Wilkes University in Pennsylvania, sex once or twice a week in the winter can boost the immune system and reduce the chances of catching colds and viral infections. So snuggling up in the winter can actually enhance the immune system. So again, we're looking at the defensive capacity that sex seems to have in protecting us against cardiovascular disease and also infectious diseases as well. And now it's also well established that healthy sexual activity can keep our brains younger, because we're not just interested in increasing our lifespan, we also want to increase our health span and our cognitive ability, our cognitive performance throughout our lives so that we can enjoy all of the years of our lives and have more life within those years. A study conducted by a team of researchers at the University of Maryland found that regular sexual activity not only triggers neurogenesis, which is the creation of new neurons in the brain, the creation of new brain cells. But sex also improves cognitive function, potentially helping people to think more clearly. All right. Now, I don't know if this has happened to you before. Have you ever thought more clearly after sex happens? Maybe you realize it was a mistake, depending on the construct of the sex. All right. Or maybe you realize like, oh, wow, like life isn't so bad, or whatever the case might be. Maybe you gain a level of clarity after the session is over. Now, this is what the researchers found. Now, another study, and this one was published in 2010 in the Journal of the Public Library of Science, found that sexual activity causes cell growth directly in the hippocampus. So this is well established to be the memory center of the brain. So this is the part of our brain that's associated with long-term memory. And sex has been found to actually create more neurogenesis, more cell growth and development in the hippocampus. Really, really powerful. Now, this leads to a significant assessment, which is understanding the most important sexual organ that we have is actually not what's downstairs, but what's between our ears. All right? Our brain is our most powerful and important sexual organ because your brain largely controls your sexual health. But as the data shows, your sexual health also influences your brain. Now, taking advantage of the things that you're going to be learning about today, in particular in the context of sex and improving longevity through sex, this requires some intentionality. This can't be something like, hey, honey, I want to increase my longevity. You know what to do. That's not the approach for this. So a healthy sexual relationship tends to have tenets of communication, trust, and safety. And the ingredients for more love and connection are going to be varied from relationship to relationship. And this isn't the context for this particular episode today because we're dedicated to longevity. But we have several masterclass episodes looking at improving the context and content of our relationships. And so we'll have several of those for you in the show notes. We've got episodes with John Gray, who wrote the book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. We've got episodes with relationship experts like Christine Hassler. The list goes on and on. So definitely check out the show notes if you want more on that domain. But I want to look at another way that sex has an impact on our lifespan, which is the impact that sex has on happiness. And the majority of clinical evidence shows that happy people do live longer. There is some data showing that pessimistic people can outlive people who are not as pessimistic, but the majority of data shows in a massive way that happy people do indeed live longer. In an Arizona State University study on about 60 middle-aged women, physical affection or sexual behavior with a partner significantly predicted lower negative mood and stress and higher positive mood the following day. Simply put, the researchers found that sex and physical intimacy led women to feel less stressed and be in a better mood the following day. And we know that stress is a major killer. Stress is a major health issue in our culture today. Upwards of 80% of physician visits today are for stress-related illnesses. When there was a time when this was more for, injuries and infectious diseases, like that was the thing that was just the norm. We've largely dealt with a lot of these issues, and now we're moving towards these chronic issues that, again, even though infectious diseases might kind of come and go, these chronic health issues, these chronic lifestyle-driven diseases just continue to go up each and every decade in our culture, and they're not really stopping. And so addressing this at its core is going to be important. So anything that can help to reduce stress and connection, affection, and sex are some of those components. A part of that being, even if we look through, because in that study, we're talking about intimacy and connection even, not necessarily just the dynamic of sex, helping with positive mood, but specifically looking at sex, if we look in the construct of orgasm, you're releasing a cocktail of chemicals that have some really remarkable anti-anxiety effects, antidepressive effects. And we're talking about a cocktail of like oxytocin, prolactin, of the increasing serotonin. All of these things happen in that context of an orgasm. So, and I was kind of hesitant to say cocktail when I was saying this chemical cocktail. That's what caught me up. So, in addition to that, a 2004 study of 16,000 Americans published in the National Bureau of Economic Research found that people who are happy tend to be the ones getting the most action. The study estimated that boosting between the sheets time from once a month to once a week was the happiness equivalent of getting a $50,000 raise. The researchers did note that the type of sex mattered, with sex in a loving relationship showing the most benefit. So again, it's like having that dynamic psychologically giving the same happiness equivalent as getting more money. All right. So a lot of really interesting data on this context and the relationship between healthy sexual activity, healthy sexual relationship, and longevity. And we're going to actually build on this piece because sex is one component of something we're going to come back to and talk about more in a moment. But I just wanted to start with this because this isn't usually a part of the conversation when we're talking about longevity. When we're talking about not just increased lifespan, but increased health span. And sex appears to have some really interesting protective effects against our biggest killer, and also adding to the equation of healthy biochemistry, of healthy immune system function, and so much more. So that's number one on our list of these 7 surprising things that are clinically proven to extend our lifespan and our health span. The next one that we're going to talk about is one of the most powerful aspects of nutrition that is largely negated, it's largely looked past. And this specifically influences one of the biggest aspects of longevity, which is cognitive health and the health of our brains. Most people are finally aware that the human brain is upwards of 80% water. So somewhere in the ballpark of 75 to 80% water. It's the most water dominant organ in our bodies next to our lungs. All right, so hydration of our brain is critically important. All right, now, what most people are not aware of is that water alone cannot maintain the functionality and connectivity of the brain cells. Without this key category of nutrients, water can't even properly hydrate, travel throughout, or store itself adequately in the brain or our other tissues, for that matter. And this category that I'm referring to is electrolytes. Electrolytes are minerals that carry an electrical charge. And it's really amazing for us to understand that our body is really running on this electrical energy in many ways. And we use devices that can measure this electrical output of the body. If we look at being able to monitor the activity of the heart, we see on the movies, boop, boop, we're measuring the electrical output of the human heart. But all of our cells are doing this, interacting with and expressing this electrical energy. And without electrolytes, literally, it's required for signal transduction for our brain cells to communicate with each other. When we become deficient in electrolytes, all of these processes for our brain and body start to plummet. Researchers at McGill University found that sodium, one of our key electrolytes, literally functions as a, quote, on-off switch in the brain for specific neurotransmitters that support optimal function and literally protect the brain against neurodegenerative diseases. So it functions as an on-off switch. So when we're low in sodium, it can switch off these protective neurotransmitters and the activity of these neurotransmitters if we don't have optimal amounts of sodium. It is that important. But yet, most often when we think of sodium, we probably think about it in a negative light, in a negative context. We'll talk more about that, but I want you to understand how important these electrolytes are. And sodium is just one of them. So it literally helps to function and defend the brain against things like epilepsy and neuropathic pain. Now, we cannot have a conversation about electrolytes and the impact on the brain without talking about magnesium. A fascinating new study published in the journal Neuron found that magnesium is able to restore critical brain plasticity and improve cognitive function, to restore it. So this is the thing that's lost. It gets degraded over our lifespan. Magnesium is key here in restoring brain plasticity and more. So let's look at this in the context of another one of our big killers, because again, a part of longevity is not dying. A double-blind, placebo-controlled study, and this was published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, found that simply improving magnesium levels in adult test subjects, and these were folks between the ages of 50 and 70, could potentially reverse brain aging by over 9 years. Again, if we're talking about lifespan and health span, literally being able to make our brains younger, something so simple. It's a simple nutrient, but it's also one of our biggest nutrient deficiencies in our culture. Right now, 56%, at least at minimum, probably closer to 70% of US citizens are chronically deficient in magnesium. And this is literally required for our brain to run processes. So we're literally walking around in our society with a brain that is underperforming, that's not functioning at its optimal level, being deficient in these key electrolytes. And with magnesium being such a big nutrient deficiency, the question is why? We probably get some in different foods and supplementation and things like that, but it's because magnesium is required by so many processes in the body. It's responsible for over 650 biochemical processes in the body. Again, that we're aware of. It's probably much more, but this is just what we've confirmed today. All right, so being deficient in magnesium, what that means is that's 650 things your body can't do or can't do adequately because of this one key electrolyte deficiency. All right, magnesium is that important. Now, magnesium is also required to make the very thing that sustains our energy, that gives us energy, this energy currency of our cells, known as ATP. Magnesium is literally required to make ATP. We often attribute this performance or the creation of ATP to our mitochondria, right? These energy power plants, these energy powerhouses within our cells. And we can have hundreds or even thousands of mitochondria in an individual cell. It's truly remarkable. Now, here's the key. The mitochondria cannot do their job without electrolytes being present. Magnesium being one, and sodium and potassium being another, functioning as what's known as the sodium-potassium pump, enabling the communication or the transition of nutrients and functionality at multiple places throughout our tissue matrix. All right, we need sodium, potassium, magnesium there in order for the magic to happen. So we just talk about the end product or the end product station with the mitochondria and ATP. If we don't have electrolytes, our bodies can't do the amazing things that they're designed to do. So in this context of ATP, magnesium is used as an enzyme cofactor that enables our mitochondria to make copies of itself. If your magnesium levels are low, then you're automatically going to have a difficult time making new mitochondria, and your health will suffer as a result. Having healthy, robust mitochondria as we age, defending us against accelerated aging diseases, accelerated aging environmental inputs, things that speed up the aging of our cells, that can burn away our telomeres. Right? So our telomeres are one of the best biological indicators that we have today as to how long we're going to live. Now, the science is still pretty fresh here. I've been talking about the science around telomeres for over a decade now and having wonderful conversations with people who've been pioneering in the discovery of things like telomerase, which is an enzyme that can effectively add length back onto those telomeres, right? So as these end caps on our chromosomes, these telomeres, think about them like the end caps on your shoestrings, all right, AKA these aglets. As our cells replicate, a little bit of that telomere gets clipped off until the cell reaches its endpoint, its senescence, its programmed cell death. And we want we want a healthy cellular replication. We don't want things to be going haywire, because that's where we get into conversations about cancer, where the cell doesn't have that programmed cell death. What we do want to do is, if we can, slow that process down a bit so that the cells can have a longer lifespan, a healthier lifespan, and have a nice synchronization with these cells being healthier longer and the replacement by new cells, and paying attention to things that help to fortify and support, protect our telomeres from getting burned down too quickly. Well, we know, for example, stress burns away those telomeres faster. Smoking burns away those telomeres faster. Sleep deprivation burns away those telomeres faster. Nutrient deprivation. All right, so missing out on key nutrients can also expedite the burning away of those telomeres because it's a stress response in the body when we don't have these key nutrients. Now, why do electrolytes matter so much in the context of longevity? Well, another piece is the homeostatic changes that take place in advanced age that can deteriorate key signaling for electrolytes. And this data was published in the journal JAMA Surgery. So that's the Journal of the American Medical Association Surgery. And what's so interesting to take away from this data is that as we age, the signaling, our body's cries or calling out for our electrolytes can get a little bit deranged. So we need to be even more proactive in making sure we're getting these key nutrients in. So proactively ensuring that we're getting adequate amounts of sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, etc. Very, very important. Now, what about specific data looking at electrolytes and longevity? Now, this one is pretty shocking, and this involves sodium. A peer-reviewed study published in the European Heart Journal titled Sodium Intake, Life Expectancy, and All-Cause Mortality revealed, quote, observation of sodium intake correlating positively with life expectancy and inversely with all-cause mortality, unquote. Shocking to the researchers and the scientific community at large, higher sodium intake than conventional beliefs about sodium is associated with a longer average life expectancy and reduced all-cause mortality, a reduced risk of death from all causes, according to this meta-analysis of data from 181 countries. Now, again, this is very outside of the paradigm of what we believe about sodium. And there are other confounding factors that could be attributing to the longer lifespan seen in the study. But the researchers did do a good job of accounting for a variety of different things, and sodium surprisingly stood out. And the lead researcher in the study said that, just getting this paper published was so hard. It was one of the most rejected papers, and he's got a ton of peer-reviewed studies that he's published. He wasn't going after to prove this. It's surprising to find out that sodium has this correlation with lifespan, with longevity. Again, causation is not confirmed, but it stood out in the data. Now, the question should automatically be why? Not just looking at what we believe to be the negative aspect of sodium. We've already covered some of it, because neglecting the fact that sodium is literally required to help conduct the impulses of your brain cells and your entire nervous system. It's required for healthy nervous system function. Kind of important. It's also required for muscle contractions. It's also required to help maintain proper fluid balance in all of our tissues. So this isn't something to just brush off like, nah, sodium's not that important. And also, we can't have more sodium than what we're programmed to believe is where we should be at. But it's understanding, again, sodium is required for so many processes, and we can actually pretty easily become deficient in these nutrients, especially if we're taking on a healthier lifestyle, because the majority of sodium people are taking in is from processed foods. About 70%, and this is depending on which resource you're looking at, 70 to upwards of 80% of the sodium people are taking in the average American diet is through processed food consumption. So just by kind of cleaning up our nutrition and avoiding these heavily processed foods, which are also coming along with a tremendous amount of sugar and chemicals, pesticides and fungicides, artificial this and that, artificial sweeteners, artificial flavorings, preservatives, the list goes on and on, that are damaging to our cells. But it's the sodium that gets most vilified. And most notably because in our popular conversation around sodium, we connect those two together, sodium and salt. We use them interchangeably, but they're two different things. All right. Sodium is a part of what makes conventional salt, which is about 60% chloride and 40% sodium. So that's the, quote, table salt. So these things are used interchangeably. And in our culture, in health conversations, sodium is often attributed to blood pressure. That's what we think about. Forget all the other things sodium is responsible for and the critical need for sodium. It's most associated cognitively for us in our culture to be a villain surrounding blood pressure. Now, sodium is required to help to modulate and manage our blood pressure, absolutely. But in simple terms, blood pressure is, if you're just wondering what is blood pressure, it's the force that blood is placing upon the walls of our blood vessels as it circulates throughout our bodies. And high blood pressure is when that force is elevated to the point that it can increase the risk of damage to our blood vessels and the cardiovascular system overall, including our heart. So this is kind of important. And the loudest screams about sodium is that it increases our blood pressure, which is true to a degree. To a degree. There's very little nuance here because it's just like sodium, watch it or you're going to die. But here's the reality. The research that initially vilified salt many decades ago originated from animal studies that gave rats massive amounts of salt, about 50 times the average intake, and deduced from that salt is a major concern for high blood pressure. That's where it all started. It all started. Yet, a large-scale, multinational study that was recently published found that salt intake does not increase health risk, even at levels that were once deemed to be unhealthy. So what gives? How is this possible? The researchers concluded that elevated blood pressure is a symptom and not a cause of cardiovascular disease and morbidity. It's a symptom of cardiovascular disease, not a cause of cardiovascular disease. And dietary salt is on a much lower rung of things that contribute to the problem, with much bigger issues being elevated triglycerides. Again, something that happens through the consumption of sugar-laden processed foods, elevated stress hormones, and inflammation. All of these things relate directly to abnormal diet and abnormal living conditions that we're now all exposed to today in our modern society. Our DNA is getting environmental inputs that we just simply didn't evolve with throughout the entire evolution of humanity. If we're talking like 99.99999% of the time that humans have been here, we have not eaten foods that we eat today. We've not been exposed to this kind of abnormal low-grade stress chronically happening. And the immense amount of environmental toxicity that we're exposed to today. All of these are new things that are constantly putting a pressure on our systems. This is why we have to be even more adamant about building our health and making sure that we're more resilient and adaptable. All right. Now, again, looking at sodium here and not being a major contributor to cardiovascular disease, let's dive a little bit deeper because the study also found that even up to around 2 teaspoons of salt per day is not problematic for most people, noting that there are indeed genetic predispositions for some folks who have challenges managing salt. All right, so 2 teaspoons might seem like a lot. That's quite a bit of salt. That's a saltiness. That's getting a little salty. But this is because of going off the RDA, right? The recommended daily allowance, which is generally to prevent deficiency and disease. All right, it's not what's optimum. All right, that's the thing. But what's even more eye-opening is that salt intake closer to the RDA and below the RDA of about 1 teaspoon per day was found to actually increase the risk of heart disease and high blood pressure. Sodium too low increased high blood pressure. A meta-analysis published in the Cochrane Database of Systematic Reviews uncovered that study participants placed on a low sodium diet did have slightly lower blood pressure in the short term, but found that the restricted sodium also led to elevated triglycerides, elevated stress hormones, and accordingly, elevated blood pressure. Very different story from what we hear around sodium. Now, also a study conducted by researchers at Harvard Medical School and published in the journal Metabolism found that low salt intake directly increases insulin resistance in healthy test subjects. Insulin resistance is one of the key components that accelerates aging, that creates advanced degradation of tissues. And having not enough sodium in the diet, again, we're using these interchangeably here, but they should kind of be pulled apart, salt and sodium. Sodium is critical in helping to modulate and manage our hormone function, including the functionality of insulin. The bottom line is that this category, this family of electrolytes are critical to the performance of our brains and our bodies. With magnesium that we touched on, and sodium and potassium, that sodium-potassium pump is critical to the support of just about every cell in the human body. They have to be present for the magic to happen. It's that important. And even magnesium, we talked about how vital that is. Magnesium is dependent upon sodium to be able to do its jobs. So now the key here is, yes, food first, but our food is becoming more and more deficient in these key electrolytes. But our body's need for these key electrolytes has not gone down. As a matter of fact, they've gone up because of our body's defenses and processes to deal with our abnormal conditions. The number one way that the human body is making and using vitamin D. This is critical. The number one way, as noted earlier at the very beginning, is through this interaction with the sun. But there are several factors that influence our skin's ability to make vitamin D. And at least one of these is going to be affecting you. The first one is one that we hinted on a little bit earlier, and it is our skin type. It's our complexion. Dramatically can affect our body's ability to convert sunlight into vitamin D. An analysis published in the peer-reviewed journal Nutrition Research found that approximately 42% of Americans are deficient in vitamin D. All right, almost half of our population. I would say more. But nearly 80% of African Americans in the study were found to be deficient in vitamin D. And about 70% of Hispanic Americans were found to be deficient in vitamin D. The darker our complexion, the more that the UVB radiation from the sun is not able to penetrate the skin and hit that epidermis, hit that cholesterol, and start that conversion process. So the darker pigment, that melanin, is a natural sunscreen. It's a natural sunblock for, just through our evolution, being in environments where we're getting constant access to sunlight. But now moving to environments where that sunlight exposure, number one, not being the same because we're, moving up north, getting a little bit higher up on the globe, but also our lack of getting sun exposure in the first place, because most folks in our society today spend the majority of their time indoors. We're not outside anymore. All right. So we're lacking one of the most critical vitamins as well, vitamin N. This might be a new one for you. It's vitamin nature. All right. You heard it here first. We're largely lacking vitamin nature. And remedying that, number one, understanding how important this is. And so how do we address this piece here? Well, if we have darker skin, we need a little bit more time in the sun. All right. So that's just one thing off the bat. If we're just specifically talking about the interaction between the sun and our skin, but there's going to be coming up the apprehension. Well, what about skin cancer? What about damage from the sun? I'm not talking about getting burnt. I'm talking about getting adequate sunlight, which is how we evolved. It's how we have life on planet Earth. But now it's been so framed to be the sun is going to kill you. The sun literally enabled you to have life. The sun isn't just outwardly trying to kill you and take you out. We've developed these powerful interactions where sunlight interacts with our genes. If you're not getting that, we're not human. All right? I'm not saying to go out and get roasted, toasted, broasted, especially if you have incredibly pale skin. That is silly. All right? The sun can hurt you. But living in a natural setting, it's difficult for it to do so. But we're not living in a natural setting. Many of us, when we finally do get some sunlight and we get sunburned, because we're spending so much time indoors and we go out and we go on vacation, and we got to lather up. But we should be getting some adequate sunlight on a regular basis, if at all possible. We'll talk about that more about where you live and those kind of things in a moment. But in general, if you have lighter skin, you're not going to need as much sun exposure. So maybe 10 to 15 minutes a day And we're going to talk about some specifics coming up next on what that looks like. And then, but maybe if you have darker skin, maybe you might need 30 minutes. All right. Which this isn't even a lot. Go outside. There's a whole world out there. Out those doors. Go and experience it. All right. This isn't even like when I'm saying these time recommendations, it's just like, that's not even a big deal. 30 minutes outside. Because I feel it in myself as well. Like 30 minutes. That's the old me still present, still traces remnants of the Shawn who did stay inherently indoors. But, just we can make that time more valuable. Get outside. You could do your workout. Combine two things together. Go outside and work out. Have a walking meeting with your coworkers, right? Or if you're doing a meeting call with somebody, put on the headset and go for a walk, get some sunlight while you do your meeting. Maybe this is a good time to just go outside and, play a game, hang out with your family or your kids, go outside and play a game. Or at least let the kids go out and play a game. You go sit and watch them and get a little bit of sunlight. We can stack conditions and find a way. All right. So that's the big thing. Number one is the skin type. We've got to be more adamant and intelligent about getting that exposure. Almost 50% of our citizens are deficient in vitamin D already, but much higher levels in the African American community. And we're also not coincidentally seeing higher rates of severe symptoms in regards to this current infectious disease, but also many other infectious diseases and chronic diseases as well. Vitamin D is an important facet. If you've got that pigment, you've got that melanin, your genes are much closer to the motherland, all right? In an environment where you would be getting more sun exposure. And now the environment is much different, but the genes, it's just a few generations separation from that. And so that change in environment is so harsh. This is one of the reasons we're having such high rates of chronic disease in our communities. Sun exposure is one of those major culprits. Of course, being inundated with poor food, stress, all these things matter. We got to take each piece back into our power, take control of the things that we can control. And one of the things we can control for free is getting a little bit more sunlight intentionally. So that's number one, is skin type. Other factors that can affect your skin's ability to make vitamin D. Number two is the time of day. You're going to make vitamin D more readily depending on what time of day it is. And so the optimal time where you're going to get the fastest conversion of that UVB into vitamin D in your body is the midday sun. All right, when the sun is at its peak, the midday sun is the most apt to contribute to that conversion. So when it's highest in the sky. All right, so the time of day. It's not the only time, but it's just the most efficient time. Pretty much any time you're getting the sunlight, if the sun is touching you, you're getting, when you can literally see, if you see it on your body, even if you can't see it, that's the thing. If it's an overcast day, the sun is still shining through. All right, different, we've got UVA, UVB, that's a whole different conversation, but the sun is still touching you. And when it's doing that, it's interacting with your body, and DNA changes are happening, genetic changes are happening. Or let's be clear, your genes don't necessarily change, it's the expression, the reading of those genes, epigenetic influences. All right, so the time of day. Next up here, other factors that affect our skin's ability to make vitamin D. The next one is your location or your latitude. Where you physically are in the world. Where are you located on the globe? Where are you located on planet Earth determines whether or not you're getting sufficient UVB. All right? Depending on what time of year it is, there's something, a lot of folks know this term, but it's the 37th parallel. It's also known as the sun belt or the vitamin D belt. It's basically like a high-rise gene belt around the globe that below the 37th parallel, you're getting adequate UVB coming through all year. But above the 37th parallel, generally, especially the winter months, but can be pretty much, half the year, you might not be getting adequate UVB actually coming through in the first place. And so if you're watching this on YouTube, we have up an image for you to see that 37th parallel, to see where you live. Are you above or below the 37th parallel? And basically, we're talking about, it goes across about half of the state of California. So the top half is up above the 37th parallel, not getting that UVB year round. And then below that is getting the UVB year round. And then going across Arizona, just the top of Arizona and the top of Texas is just below Missouri, just below Kansas, just below Colorado. So those states are not getting that year round. All the way is basically kind of cutting off in between North Carolina and South Carolina on the East Coast. So the upper East Coast states are not getting that UVB year round. So we see the deficiencies. The data shows clearly, you see the deficiencies are higher in the northern states. All right. In particular for African American community, more likely to be vitamin D deficient living in the states that are above that 37th parallel. So, but if you don't live below the 37th parallel and getting that UVB year round, move. No, I'm just kidding. You don't have to move. You don't have to move. There are other strategies here. You can if you want to, but there are other strategies. All right. So of course I lived in Missouri pretty much my entire life and always found optimal vitamin D levels because the body can actually store, as we mentioned, vitamin D for a sufficient amount of time if we kind of build it up and store it up in our system. And so you can kind of last a little bit through those darker months. However, this is a time where food becomes more important and supplementation becomes important as well. I'm a big proponent of food first. And so we're going to talk about that. But this is definitely a spot for some smart supplementation. But that comes with some important caveats, which we'll get to in a moment. So that's the third one here on other factors that affect our skin's ability to make vitamin D. So we got skin type, time of day, and your latitude, your location. Number 4 is the time of year. The time of year affects the amount of UVB that you're getting from the sun. No matter where you are, the amount of sunlight available is going to change depending on the time of year. In the winter months, the days are much shorter, and this is the height, funny enough, of vitamin D deficiencies each year. So just think about this cognitively. During the winter months, during that time of year, when the days are a little bit darker, a little bit shorter, when is cold and flu season taking place? Just think about that. A brilliant pathologist named Dr. Ryan Cole said, quote, "There is no such thing as cold and flu season. There is only low vitamin D season," unquote. And us truly understanding today in this vitamin D masterclass, how important vitamin D is for regulating our immune system, our hormones, our DNA, and our genetic expression, we can start to understand how true that statement is. Because if you think about it, why suddenly is the world making me sick? Like the rest of the year is cool, but now it's like cold and flu season. What changes? And we think, oh, it's because it's cold. So we call it a cold, it's because it's cold. No. You know about cryotherapy? You know about the Iceman Wim Hof, right? He's actually doing this cold. His immune system is being studied by all these scientists. All these documentaries are being made about him because of his immune system's resilience. It's not the cold. The cold doesn't give you the cold. Put a coat on, you're going to catch cold. You don't catch cold, man. How do you you don't catch a cold. That's not how it works. It's deficiency that enables a lot of times, most of the time, opportunistic bacteria, viruses, things that we're already carrying around on our bodies. We don't catch something the majority of the time. It's something we're already carrying around with us when our immune system gets compromised because we're vitamin D deficient. So again, he said, there is no such thing as cold and flu season. There is only low vitamin D season. All right, so the time of year matters. And that's going to be a big concern that comes up is like, well, what about, I live in, New York. I live in Michigan. And during the winter months, I can't even get any sunlight in the first place. Like it's freezing outside. When you can, during the months when the sun is shining, first and foremost, the most important thing is be more adamant about getting yourself access to real sunlight. And New York City is one of the coolest places in the world, but we've got all these skyscrapers. Literally just walking down the street, oftentimes, the sun is just being blocked out. So being more adamant about finding places where you can get some sunlight. All right. They actually got a lot of like rooftop gardens jumping off, rooftop like hangout spots. So during the times of the year when the sun is viable and the UVB is getting through, again, based on the time of year is going to determine the 37th parallel, how much sunlight is coming through. So during the times you can get sunlight, get sunlight. Outside of that, we've got to address our nutrition, which we're going to get to in a moment. So be not alarmed. We're all going to be taken care of, but first and foremost, when you can get sunlight, get more of it. All right, what else can block our skin's ability to make sunlight into vitamin D? The next one here is pollution. A study published in the journal Nature Reviews Endocrinology determined that air pollution can be a causative agent in vitamin D deficiency. All right, again, it's not so much what the sun is doing, it's our interaction with nature and what we're doing, creating this symptom. We're creating the environment where, we're creating pollution where the sun isn't able to interact with our bodies normally. This could even potentially have certain rays of the sun being able to pierce through without the complementary rays. All right, so we get into that conversation. So pollution. So if you're in a place that has more pollution, your likelihood of vitamin D deficiency can go up. And right now, there's a really big press by some of the wealthiest people in the world to deal with climate change and global warming to effectively start to block out the sun by adding some components to our atmosphere, by adding some chemicals to our atmosphere, some synthetic chemicals to our atmosphere to block out the sun's radiation. This is a real thing. I'm going to play the clip for you.
Bill Gates is backing the first high-altitude experiment of one radical climate change solution, creating a massive chemical cloud that could cool the Earth. It's called solar geoengineering, and it's highly controversial. It would look something like this. Thousands of planes would fly very high and use nozzles to inject millions of tons of light-reflecting particles into the stratosphere. It would create a thin chemical cloud of those particles around the whole planet, blocking some sunlight from reaching the surface. It would mimic a giant volcanic eruption, which we know cools the Earth.
So the level of thinking behind it is the fact that a volcanic eruption has been known to help to block out the sun's radiation. How did that work out for the dinosaurs? You gotta be kidding me. And who's at the helm? Who's in the driver's seat? Billy G. Mr. Gates. He's driving this. If he had his way, which he has his way with so many things that are affecting our world right now. All right, he's having his way with you. But we got to stop this one, like ASAP. This is ridiculous. It's insane because it's not looking at what are the downstream effects. Okay, we reduce global warming. What happens to the algae in the ocean? What happens to plants that are dependent upon photosynthesis and the whole ecological cycle that feeds into that? What happens to microorganisms? What happens to insects? What happens to us? Our relationship with the radiation from the sunlight and our ability to make vitamin D. And vitamin D is just one thing. This is the thing. What we're talking about today and why this deserves a masterclass is because we have the data on this and people need to know it. But there is so much that we don't know. Sun exposure and its interaction with the human body, because again, the sun enabled us to have life here on this planet. We don't even understand all of the things that it's doing for us and that delicate interaction. And now we're going to let's put some synthetic chemicals coating around the earth to block the sun out. That sounds like some evil genius movie thing. Like, going to block out the sun. Are you kidding me? This isn't a movie. We got to stop letting Billy G run. Are you kidding me? Come on. With the sweater? How? He seems super unthreatening, but those be the ones. So again, also, greatest financier right now of the WHO, dictating so many things about mandates, so many things about this huge press to bring another pharmaceutical drug to the market, make sure everybody gets it, healthy or not. Abandon your logic. He's in the driver's seat. Now, I usually don't even, Microsoft is cool, whatever. But you're messing with my family. You're messing with my world family. We're not gonna have that. Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here to up-level your health today. Fat in foods does not directly translate to the fat on our bodies, right? Storage fat or structural fats, but there are specific fats that do contribute to the performance and rebuilding your structural fats in your brain.